advisory. He advises on contract negotiation, intellectual property protection, regulatory compliance, and corporate governance. In addition to his client's advisory work, he has contributed to national policy initiatives, including the review of Nigeria's national intellectual property policy and the ongoing development of Nigeria's e-commerce policy, aimed at strengthening the country's digital economic framework. Mr. Charles, I hope you're on the call.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone see me and hear me well?
Yes, we can see you and hear you. So over to you, Charles. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peace. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charles Ikpe. I'm an associate at the firm advisory in the corporate, commercial, and finance practice area. And today, what we'll basically be doing is to be taking a deep dive into the AfCFTA and everything that it entails for Africa and the African continent and globally as well. And before I go in, I would just like to gauge the amount of knowledge every one of us might have already of the AfCFTA and what it entails. So is there anyone who has heard of the AfCFTA or has perhaps come in contact in work or school or wherever? If there's anyone like that, can you indicate maybe in the chat box or by using an emoji? Is there anyone? So I'm taking it that nobody has. Okay, so that's the purpose of this session, really, because part of what we have noticed in Africa is that there's a lot of policies, a lot of wonderful legislation that is simply unknown, really, to the general populace.
Hold on a second. Is this being recorded? Just want to confirm.
Yes, I guess. Yes, it is.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, so there are a lot of policies, very excellently worded policies that the general public, the people who it's supposed to affect, the people who it's supposed to impact the lives of, do not even know, have not even heard about these policies. And that is the purpose of this internship program, to bring you up to speed with a lot of these things so that when you go out there, you can impact your communities from your own viewpoint. So I'm just going to share my screen so that you can see a presentation that we have prepared. So this is just basically the purpose of our session today will be basically to see how we can leverage our creative economy in Africa for growth and trade under the AfCFTA. And we'll start by taking a look at the history of the AfCFTA. The treaty establishing the African Economic Community. This is just a background into the process that eventually led to the AfCFTA. So first of all, you have to understand that the AfCFTA is a product of years of African longing for its own independence, for the ability for Africans to be able to chart their own course economically and in terms of the advancement of the African purpose. And there have been many treaties like the Abuja Treaty, which was adopted on the 3rd of June, 1991, entered into force on 12th May, 1994. And this treaty has been signed by all member states of the OAU, African Union today, except Eritrea. So basically the AfCFTA is one free trade area for the whole of Africa. What that means is that the whole of Africa is as good as one country in terms of trade. So the same way it should be in your own country, where you can trade with someone in a different state or in a different province or wherever you are, that is the vision of the AfCFTA. so that there will be the geographical lines that divide us will be removed and trade will be much easier, because that is it's a hindrance to trade when there's so many tariffs and so many problems in terms of geographical placement, where people have to apply for visas, people have to pay extra tariffs on certain goods from certain areas, and this hinders trade. And for Africa, this is especially more difficult because over the years, Africa has suffered because of a lack of attention, because of a lack of purpose in these areas. And this is Africa deciding to take a stand and say, we are about to chart our own course. We want to do things in a way that will benefit us and not always to benefit Europe or America and all those other world powers, if you like. So the AfCFTA is basically a tool for African independence economically. And the agreement found in the AfCFTA was brokered by the AU and signed by 44 of its 55 member states in Rwanda, Kigali, Rwanda, on the 21st of March, 2018. So the AfCFTA Secretariat is in Ghana, and that's just a background on what it's about. So basically, some key points as to the reason for the AfCFTA. What is this really about? What is the aim? What's the purpose for the AfCFTA? The number one thing is that it serves as a foundation for an African common market. As I said earlier, the whole of Africa is now one big block of people who can trade amongst themselves without extra tariffs imposed, without extra problems, without having to say, oh, okay, will there be any problems at the border and all that. All that is what the AfCFTA is meaning to change. I don't know, I'm sure I did not say the full meaning of the AfCFTA, by the way, the African Free Trade, Continental Free Trade Area, African Continental Free Trade Area, that's the full meaning. So it's the whole of Africa under one block, and it's the largest free trade area in the world, serves 1.3 billion people. As we know, the population of Africa. Africa is the second largest continent in terms of population. So you can see that there's a lot of potential in being able to trade amongst ourselves. And this AfCFTA provides a foundation for an African common market where everyone can trade amongst each other and increase our input and output. And the second point to note is that it regulates the OAU work and aim. So like we said, Africa has been charting a course for its independence for a long time. And this AfCFTA agreement is a tool which puts that dream into actualization, right? How can we carry Africa from being this provider to the world and everyone keeps coming and taking? How can we be enjoying the benefits of our own sovereignty? And sorry. And yes, this is just about Nigeria. So basically, the treaty provides for the creation of an African economic community through a gradual process of coordination, harmonization, and progressive integration of the activities of existing and future regional economic communities in Africa. So this will be done in 6 successive stages over a period of 34 years. We know it's not going to be a quick fix. Africa has suffered decades of neglect, decades of poor rule, decades of corruption, and so many issues, policy-wise and otherwise. And of course, it's in stages. It will take a while, but a period of 34 years has been set by the AU for the complete realization of the objectives of the AfCFTA. And some of them are strengthening the RECs, that is the SADC, COMSA, the ECOWAS, as you might know, those are the resident economic commissions for the different regional economic commissions for the different regions, and stabilization of tariff. This is very important. Stabilization of tariff and other barriers to regional trade, and the strengthening of industry and energy. Sectoral integration, particularly in the field of trade, agriculture, finance, transport, and communication. That is a very important aspect of the AfCFTA, stabilization of tariffs, where there are not different tariffs for different products, where countries can trade with another country without fearing, oh, there will be 125% tariffs like we are hearing in with the US and China, tariffs being placed on goods from a particular nation, making it difficult for people to have access to goods from that nation, and of course, reducing the trade, the amount of trade between both nations. We've seen that a lot. A lot of countries in the world now are gearing towards nationalist policies. But in the midst of all that, we are saying, how can we as Africans now come together and take advantage of this and improve our own fortunes? So in the field of trade, agriculture, finance, and communication, this AfCFTA will stabilize tariffs and other barriers, tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers to regional trade, and strengthen the industry, and by so doing, the economies of Africa. Establishment of a free trade area, of course, is another objective. So I've already said harmonization of tariff and non-tariff systems. That is built to happen within the first 2 years of its actualization of the AfCFTA. The establishment of a common market and the adoption of common policies. So the aim is that every country comes together and agrees, yes, we are all following the same policies in regards to trade, the same policies on tariffs, the same policies on these barriers to trade that we've already spoken about. And because there is that harmonization, everybody knows what's going on. I don't have to be guessing if I'm in Nigeria and I want to trade with South Africa. I don't have to start thinking, oh, what is obtainable where and where, right? Everyone goes by the same rules. Everyone plays by the same book. So basically the integration of all sectors, the establishment of a central bank, that's a single central bank for Africa, and a single African currency. Those are the long-term goals of the AfCFTA, the establishment of a single central bank and a single African currency, and setting up an African monetary union and creating and electing the first Pan-African parliament. So these are some of the long-term ambitions that the AU has in respect to the AfCFTA. Basically, it's bringing everybody together. After years of fractions and wars and problems, how can we bring everyone together to actualize the dreams of an independent and sovereign Africa economically and otherwise? So that's it. So this basically shows the countries that have ratified the AfCFTA. As you can see, the countries in blue are the countries that have ratified it. The countries in red have not ratified, and the countries in yellow, which is just Eritrea, have not even signed the agreement at all. So there is progress. As you can see, most of the African countries listed here in blue, about 44 of them have ratified the AfCFTA. So there's still progress to be made in that respect, as you can see, but the ball has been rolling for a while now. And these are just some quick facts on the AfCFTA. So 54 out of 55 member states of the AU have signed the agreement, as you just saw, leaving only Eritrea. And 88% of rules of origin have been completed. So the rules of origin are basically a a document that shows how do you decide when a product is African. So if you're saying that, okay, we are trading African goods between ourselves, given that the world is a global market and someone can get raw materials from America, someone can get different parts of a finished product can be obtained from different parts of the world. How then do you decide what is African or not? So the rules of origin provide an insight into what can be considered an African product at the end of the day. So 88% of rules of origin have been completed with only automotive and textile sectors remaining. So you can also see that the AfCFTA is expected to boost Africa's income by $450 billion by 2035, which is a gain of 7%, $450 billion, while adding $76 billion to the income of the rest of the world. So it's not just going to impact us positively, it's also going to impact the global economy as well. And another fact is that the AfCFTA is the largest free trade area in the world. I mentioned that. And it connects 1.3 billion people across 55 countries in Africa with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. And 8 African countries have already kickstarted trade in 96 products under the Guided Trade Initiative of the AfCFTA. And now with this chart, you can see how much work needs to be done. You see the percentage of intra-regional exports, this is as of 2017, is 55% between the countries in America, in South America, okay, the whole of America rather. There's 68.1% between the countries in Europe. There's 59.4% in Asia. And then look at the 2 continents at the bottom. Africa has only 16.6% of trade between itself intra-regionally. And that is something that needs to change because there is so much opportunity. There is so much leeway for Africans to be able to profit from themselves rather than always trying to see how we can reach out to countries in other continents. And that is what the AfCFTA is hoping to achieve in the next 35 years. So you see the implications and opportunities. There's a potential GDP growth of 15 to 16.9%. Exports could also increase by at least 15%. Employment could rise by at least 10.9 million. Enhanced market access and trade volumes. Diversification of exports beyond oil and agriculture. So a lot of African countries are still traditionally focused on oil, like Nigeria, for instance, we're an oil-heavy economy, where oil exports make up about 90% or so of Nigerian exports. That is what the AfCFTA seeks to change. Can we move away from this traditional exporting and all that of oil and other sectors? Let's see how we can do a holistic building of Africa. And of course, job creation in technology and e-commerce sectors, attraction of foreign investment, and opportunities for collaboration with other African countries. That is just the main crux of the AfCFTA, collaboration with other countries, you know. And so as regards this, there are a few challenges, as we know. There are infrastructure deficiencies across Africa. This is not just relating to one country. Internet access is an issue, power supply, insecurity as well. There are so many issues in terms of infrastructure deficiencies. There's also regulatory gaps in data protection and cybersecurity across board. And of course, the need for capacity building, which is why we are here today, especially for MSMEs across the continent. And then the digital divide across regions and demographics. Some countries are better placed than others. Like Nigeria has a very, I wouldn't say very high, but a good enough internet penetration. But there are other countries that barely have internet penetration, and this causes challenges, because then how then can we integrate and how then can we trade amongst each other when there's such a big digital divide? And of course, cultural challenges and xenophobia. We've heard about several issues of people not being able to go to other countries, and visa problems and all that. And someone said once in a video that I watched that it's easy. I think it was Aliko Dangote that said it's easier for someone from Europe to come to Africa than for him from Nigeria to go to another African country. And that is absolutely ridiculous, if you ask me. There should be no way that an African should not be able to access another African country for business and for any other thing that he wants to do. And so those are just some of the challenges that have shown up while trying to implement the AfCFTA. And then in terms of what can be done across board, holistically, there has to be a comprehensive regulatory framework for the AfCFTA, for digital trade, for trade in goods, trade in services. Everything has to come together. Everyone, all the African countries that are party to this agreement have to come up with standardized rules that everyone plays by, right? And of course, the countries themselves individually have to invest in digital infrastructure and universal internet access, because this is the groundwork for the AfCFTA to be successfully implemented in Africa rather. And without this investment in infrastructure digitally and otherwise, there will always be a gap and there will always be difficulties. And of course, implementing robust data protection and cybersecurity, focusing on skill development and capacity building, which is what we are doing now, and has to be scaled to a larger scale to bring in more people into the knowledge net, and addressing the digital divide to ensure equitable participation. So now that we have looked at the AfCFTA, we are now looking at, since we have historically fallen behind in being able to trade with ourselves and with the rest of the world, what are our prospects? What sectors of African life can we tap into and scale and become the next great global economy as one? And the creative economy is not far away. The creative economy, Africa has been a treasure bank of history and creativity for millennia, you know, from the pyramids of Egypt down to metallurgy to different creations of the African mind. The creative industry, the creative economy is a gold mine for Africa in 2025 and onwards in terms of the AfCFTA. And we're going to be looking at the creative industry as a case study to understand how can Africa tap into the creative industry to be able to actualize the dreams of the AfCFTA. Because if you look around you, I'm assuring you that some of the most popular artists, some of the most popular movies on streaming, some of the best designers are African, right? And this just shows that Africans have been doing well on an individual basis. So how then can we make this a collective thing for all Africans? So first things first, we'll be looking at what the creative industry is, what it entails, and UNCTAD, which is the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development, defines the creative economy as knowledge-based economic activities based on individual creativity, skill, and talent. Knowledge-based economic activities based on individual creativity, skill, and talent. So basically what this is that it is one for all. Everybody's creativity is used to advance the cause of everybody, right? And individual's creativity that advances the cause of everybody as a whole. And the activities that UNCTAD included as part of creative economy include, uh, um, sorry, include arts, culture, design, media, publishing, software, advertising, architecture, fashion, and audio visuals. Basically anything that involves complex working of the mind to put your mind and to create something out of it is part of the creative economy, whether it be music, whether it be movies, whether it be textile design, whether it be media, all that falls under the creative economy. And the major characteristic of the creative economy, number one, is that it's IP centered, intellectual property based. The creative economy is built on IP protection. And without that, there is no way that the creative economy can be advanced, right? It's also technology driven, it's talent intensive, and it is exportable. So these are key characteristics of the creative economy. And I'll these are just some metrics to show the size of the global creative economy before we look into Africa. And we see the global value of the creative economy is approximately $2.25 trillion annually, $2.35 trillion, and which results in 3% of global GDP. And it creates over 30 million direct jobs worldwide, 30 million direct jobs. And creative goods exports grew at an average annual rate of 7.2% between 2002 and 2015. And this is from UNCTAD's Creative Economy Outlook. So the top sectors in terms of the global creative economy: visual arts, publishing, advertising, television, and design. So looking at Africa's current contribution to this global creative economy, I don't know if you saw, it says 2.25 trillion annually. And Africa and the Middle East combined account for only 3% of as the creative and cultural and creative economy output. That's $58 billion. And Africa alone is only about 2% of the entire amount that we've contributed to the global creative economy. When you juxtapose this with the fact that Africa has the second highest population and has one of the fastest birth rates, has one of the youngest populations in the world, it simply doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that we would have only 2% of global creative economy output amounting to 58 billion. And we contribute less than 1% of global creative goods exports. Global creative exports. So this just gives you an insight into some of the things that the AfCFTA is trying to change, right? So we can see that from all this, all the things I've mentioned, the amount of our population, the birth rate, everything, that the amount of opportunity in Africa, we can see that there is a huge potential. That's an understatement, really, that there is a potential for investment in this area, the creative industry. Africa holds 17% of the global population. You can imagine that Africa alone underperforms in creative economic indicators. And these are the country by country snapshots of their contributions. In Nigeria, we see Nollywood. Nollywood is the film industry in Nigeria. It's the second largest film industry by volume. They contribute about $600 million to GDP, that's about 2.3%, and employ about 1 million people. And in South Africa, the cultural and creative sectors contribute about 3% of GDP, resulting in about creation of about 1.14 million jobs. And Egypt, it's about cultural employment constitutes about 20% of the labor workforce. And Ghana, the fashion, film, and music industries are rapidly growing, with over 2.5 million employed by the creative industries. And we see that there is still a lot of work to be done, because if you look at how many people Nollywood employs, say 1 million people, and you think of the fact that Nigeria's population is 200 million plus, that's basically, I don't know how many, the percentage, maybe 0.2%. And a lot more can be done across board to improve the indices of the creative economy's contribution. And in terms of demographics, gender and youth participation, we see that the creative industry on its own is very gender aware. It supports a lot of gender policies. See, Africa's median age, number one, is 19.7 years. That's very young. We're the world's youngest continent. So there is a lot of opportunity for Africa to become that with a youthful population. And creative industries absorb large numbers of young people and women. You see, women constitute 49.7% of Africa's recreational, cultural, and services labor force. So women are very involved in the creative industries in Africa, and it bodes well for the future. And the growth is driven by digital native youth skilled in ICT, media, and digital storytelling. So in terms of exports, we have been able to export about 3.46 billion worth of creative services in 2018 and 3.28 billion in 2019. Now, there was a decline due to COVID-19, and we can just see the leading exporters: Morocco, South Africa, Egypt, Ghana, and the emerging markets in terms of Kenya, Senegal, Rwanda. And these are just some of the markets that are pulling their weight in the African creative industry. And we see that the gaming industry, especially, it's a high growth area. It's expanding at about 12% compound annual growth rate between 2019 and 2025. And from the gaming industry alone, 2021 revenues, South Africa, $290 million, Nigeria, $185 million, and Ghana, $42 million. Now, we see that this is not a lot, but this is basically without regulatory backing, without any sort of support, and yet there has been some progress. Now, with the backing of the AfCFTA and the individual governments, there will be a lot more to come from emerging areas like gaming and other areas that we have looked at. And now we see the key challenges facing the creative industry. Number one is limited data and metrics. And as the saying goes, data is the new oil, right? So data runs every aspect of society. Without meaningful data, without having data that is tailored to the African continent, and not just data that is collected by international bodies and whatnot, it's going to be very difficult to advance the cause of the creative industries, because there's a lot of underreporting of data, and the informality of the participants in the creative industry makes collecting data a lot more difficult than it should be. And of course, we've looked at weak infrastructure, which is a problem across board. We've looked at financial constraints. And of course, we know that money is what makes the world go round. And people have not been able to, participants in the creative industry are not able to to access the required funding to be able to scale their businesses and to access global markets. And this has drawn us back a bit. And just to give you an insight into how bad it is, I was reading an article the other day that spoke to how the Nigerian music industry for the longest time has been focusing on funding from, this is not my statement, but focusing on funding from fraudsters, really, because they cannot go to banks or financial institutions to be able to access loans, to be able to sing or to be able to make music, and they have to go through men of the underworld, basically, to be able to access this funding because that's the only way they can. And this is the Nigerian music industry that is quickly growing into one of the biggest in the world. We have artists all over the world doing big things, and they are barely able to access funding. These are part of the things that need to change going forward, and which the AfCFTA seeks to change. And of course, piracy and IP violations. We've already spoken about how IP is the bedrock of creative economy. Without IP, then the creative economy cannot stand. And we see that an estimated 90% of Nollywood's distribution is pirated content. Now just think about that for a second. Nollywood is the second largest exporter of content in the world, and yet 90% of it is pirated. So imagine how much money is lost to the creators, to the government. It's terrible. So piracy and IP violations need to be curtailed for African creative economy to really explode. And of course, regulatory gaps in terms of outdated cultural and creative sector policies. In Nigeria, I think in 1988, we started out on the creative economy policy, and for that's about 37 years or so, it had never been brought into use. And it's only just recently that with the help of the Firma advisory, that the policy was able to be finished, and we're looking forward to that policy being validated, right? And we see that a lot of countries in Africa also have the same story in relation to creative economy. There has not been a lot of importance placed, and that needs to change going forward. And of course, obsolete legal frameworks, I've talked about that, with IP enforcement, absence of a unified continental policy, and colonial legacies. So persistent economic models that are looking for how to import oil and import agricultural produce, which is good. It's still part of the purpose of the AfCFTA, but we have to look at things that we have not looked at. We have to tap into things that we have seen are going for us already, and we can improve on to become stronger in that area. And now we see features of Africa's creative sector, the cultural diversity. Like I said, there's a lot of rich traditions, a lot of languages, a lot of arts, a lot of expressions that come out of Africa that are untapped. And we have to change this going forward. The AfCFTA is trying to bring everyone together to say, okay, we are all different languages, we all have different traditions, but how can we exchange this amongst ourselves? How can the Nigerian Ashoke and the Adiwe get to someone in South Africa easier? How can we do all these things that improve trade between ourselves, And it's youth-driven, right? It's tech-savvy generation. We've looked at the median age of Africa, which is 19.7 years, and we see that there's a lot of opportunity in that area. There's female empowerment, like we've already noted, that there's about 40+% of women are involved in the creative industry, which is very advanced. And there's also a lot of informality. So a lot of the creative industry is still informal. They are not registered. They don't really have the ground to really scale. And can we mute, please?
Put it on Twitter.
Please, if your mic is on, please mute, please.
I'm also thinking, Charles, in terms of time, how much time do we have? It might also be good to take some questions as well.
Yeah. So I'm rounding up very soon. So in the next 5 minutes, I should be done. So we see there's a lot of informality, the predominance of micro, small, and informal creative businesses in Africa, which also feeds into the difficulty to collect data because there is not a lot of formal businesses. So in terms of what the AfCFTA promises in terms of opportunities for cultural and creative industry, one is market access. That's the most important. Everyone under one umbrella, everyone pursuing the same goals, everyone being able to trade with their neighbors without having all these extra tariffs and extra barriers in terms of extra barriers that prevent trade amongst Africans, visa access and whatnot, and stronger IP protection. And now part of the AfCFTA's work is improving. They also have a protocol on intellectual property, right? So there are many protocols. There's the digital trade protocol, there's a protocol on trade in goods, protocol on trade in services, protocol on intellectual property. So basically what that will do going forward is that there will be one uniform intellectual property protection body as well, where you can have an invention in Nigeria, and when you submit your invention to that body, it becomes protected all over Africa. So it reduces administrative costs, it reduces the time that you need to take to protect your invention all over Africa. And it really bodes well for the intellectual property space. And of course, regional value chains are obviously going to improve, more collaboration between creative clusters across countries, and of course, digital trade expansion. E-commerce between all these countries will boost creative exports, increasing GDP, increasing economic prosperity for Africans. So you see the sectoral growth projections for film, for music, for fashion, for cultural tourism across the continent. These are just some of the things that the AfCFTA promises. And for this to be actualized, African countries need to get together to plug gaps in the policies, to plug gaps in regulation, to plug gaps in attitudes as well, because the attitudes are the basis of this AfCFTA, what it's trying to change. And you see, why invest in Africa's creative economy? Why should we focus? What is the value proposition? You see that there are untapped consumer markets and diaspora demand. Like I said, our music is all over the world now. Artists are shutting down stages in France, in India, everywhere. And of course, the diaspora wants more of us. And for more of us to be able to reach them, there has to be more of us amongst ourselves first, right? Opportunity to diversify economies from traditional commodities, like we mentioned, oil, agriculture, and all that, to intellectual property, right? Property of the mind. And of course, job creation, poverty alleviation, and soft power projection. So in order to strengthen CCIs, how can we strengthen this? The first step is to complete all the AfCFTA protocols on IP, investment, competition policy, digital trade, which is already ongoing. Countries are still negotiating the terms of this protocol, still trying to see how we can fit everybody in so that we can have one body of work that everyone can go with. And of course, for the countries individually, you have to develop creative infrastructure. So broadband access, cultural centers, digital platforms have to be developed. And of course, access to finance. More financial institutions have to plug into the creative economy. There are a few that are on its way, like I read of Canex by the Afrexim Bank. And there are a few institutional opportunities for access to finance available to Africans. And of course, talent development. We can't just say, okay, raw talent is not just enough. We have to invest in developing the youth of Africa because it's arable land really for explosion. And enhancing data collection, invest in mapping cultural and creative economy and sectoral statistics. So there's a case study that the AfPC carried out. We held a town hall meeting in Aba. Aba is a city in Abia State, Nigeria. And we looked at the Aba garment cluster. And Aba is one of the most industrialized cities in Nigeria. And we, however, saw that for years there has been a lack of coordinated effort in these garment clusters in that city. And we see the economic impact that it has, 21,000 jobs, this garment cluster, and 100,000 informal tailors employed in the city alone. So we see that there is a lot of opportunity in that city. And we see exports, in terms of exports, about the supply apparel across West Africa. If you're a Nigerian, you know what I'm talking about. There's almost nothing that is not produced in that city, yet they lack formal IP protection and industrial and institutional support. And then you see the challenges, lack of standards. There are no real standards that guide how every product is made. People just make products. There's nothing that guides the quality of these products. And of course, poor infrastructure, and still going back to the issue of weak access to finance. And we see that the opportunities from this our town hall meeting is that we could scale up production and brand made in Aba internationally with AfCFTA support. Many of these producers in Aba, they would make goods on their own, and yet they would still have to put Gucci or Ferragamo or some designer name, simply because they believe if they put their own names or put made in Aba, nobody will buy it. And these are just some of the attitudes that need to change in terms of exporting our creative industries, right? These attitudes need to change. We need to put more emphasis on the goods that are coming out of us being produced here. And with the AfCFTA, that provides an opportunity for made in Aba products to be able to be accessible in other countries without having to go through the extra tariffs or extra difficulties of that. And basically, we looked at that situation, and we looked at the advantages of creating clusters. Now, these trade clusters, where there are a lot of industries of a similar kind in a specific geographical area, they lead to enhanced economies of scale. We know, all of us, I'm sure a lot of us know, have heard of Silicon Valley. That's a technological cluster in the US. And because they are all in the same place, suppliers are competing to service them. And of course, it brings down costs because they can collaborate as well. And these were just some of the policy recommendations that came out of this town hall meeting. And we saw that if we can bring all these garment workers, this 100,000 or so together, and put them in one place and say, this is the Silicon Valley, or name it whatever, in Aba for garment manufacturing, you can imagine the amount of impact that such clusters can bring to that particular city. And everyone that attended was able to pick up actionable recommendations to scale that. So that's just one example. There are many cities across Africa that also have that sort of potential to grow under the AfCFTA. And if we can work together as a continent, if we can bring a collaborative force and push the AfCFTA's ambitions, creative industries can drive industrialization, employment for the youth, foreign exchange, of course, and of course, Africa's cultural leadership, which has already started, already a location of choice for a lot of people. So Africa's global cultural leadership will really take off. And this is a moment to unleash Africa's creative power. And in film, in music, in gaming, in fashion, in visual arts, there are plenty of opportunities, but challenges like piracy and infrastructure and financing have to be addressed. And this is where I will stop for now and open the floor for any questions any of you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Charles, for your insightful session. So we won't waste so much time. We have some questions on the chat box. So Teniel says, I'm curious about the potential effects of Trump's tariff policies on the dynamics and implementation of the AfCFTA. Could increased global tariffs influence intra-African trade on AfCFTA's overall success? Can you answer the question, please?
Okay, so I'm trying to look at it. The first one, right? Which one is that?
Daniel.
Daniel, right?
Daniel, yeah, on the chat box, first question.
Okay. I'm curious about the potential effects of Trump's tariff policies on the dynamics and implementation of the AfCFTA. Could increased global tariffs influence intra-African trade or AfCFTA's overall success? In my opinion, slightly, right? But because the focus of the AfCFTA is intra-African, that's Africans themselves, so basically, it's only going to affect Africa slightly. We have to focus on ourselves. The tariffs, they are targeted at China, at so many other countries of the world. But the purpose of the AfCFTA is African integration, right? Let's stop looking out, right? Let's focus on ourselves. Let's build trade amongst ourselves first and foremost. Then we can now think of how we can export that on that basis, right? So even though, yes, while we are trying to export to the global market, it might affect us. The purpose of the AfCFTA is for us to actualize our dreams via ourselves, right? Just the same thing that Trump says he's doing in terms of the nationalistic policies where it's America first. For the AfCFTA, it's Africa first. And so we are trying to see how everybody can be on board to move African economies forward. So in my opinion, it will slightly when we're trading with the global economy, but in terms of intra-African trade, not so much. Does that answer your question?
Daniel, does that answer your question, please?
Yes, hi. Yes, it does a bit, but I also believe that even though the tariffs are imposed on other countries, and I understand that AfCFTA does focus on more the intra-Africa trade, I do believe that like his tariff impositions will affect like the global economy and trade in general. So yeah, but that's an interesting perspective. So thank you.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you for that. Any other question?
Yes, the next question. How can AfCFTA and the Belt and Road Initiative complement one another to fasten the economic progress of Africa?
Well, the AfCFTA, like I said, is focused on intra-African trade, and every sort of collaboration is welcome if it advances the African goal. Remember, we said that the goal of the AU is one continent, one currency, one economy to actualize the economic dreams of Africans, right? To reduce unemployment, to reduce poverty, to increase our exports, and to position Africa as a global leader of sorts in different areas of economy. And in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative, like I said, whatever it is that complements the AfCFTA's dreams will always be welcome, right? So in terms of how they can, okay, the question is how they complement one another. Okay, so both policies are to actualize African economic dreams, like I said. So they work hand in hand with the AfCFTA Digital Trade Protocol, the intellectual property protocols, the trade in goods, trade in services. Everything is focused on actualizing African prosperity, right? So the AfCFTA is more focused on how we can do it amongst ourselves first as a continent, and then we can now focus on the rest of the world as is. So in terms of the complementary aspects, like I said, anything that advances the cause of African sovereignty economically is welcome for the AfCFTA. Is there any other question?
Yes, there's one more question, or two more actually. So Alina says,
Yes.
what challenges have African countries faced in fully ratifying and implementing the AfCFTA agreement since its signing? Her second question is, why is IP enforcement weak in many African countries? Just a question from Alina, sorry.
Why can't I say it? What challenges have African countries faced in fully ratifying and implementing the AfCFTA agreement? Okay, one of the main challenges has been that because there are different countries have different priorities, right? In terms of trade, in terms of what they want to trade, in terms of what they want out of the agreement. And so, of course, it has taken lots of months of negotiations because, like I said, countries have different priorities. So some countries want to trade in goods, some countries want to trade in services, and they want particular tariffs imposed on or removed on certain goods and everything. So it's been a long road in terms of the negotiation of these individual policies. Well, that's about the AfCFTA themselves. And of course, for a lot of countries, like Nigeria, before an agreement, that's a regional agreement, can be implemented, it has to be domesticated by the legislature of Nigeria, right? So a lot of countries also have provisions like that where agreements that they have entered into are not domesticated. And of course, it creates a lag in how much these policies can be implemented, these agreements can be implemented. So a lot of countries have not domesticated it. And of course, that presents its own difficulties as well. Then still back to the usual challenges of infrastructure, deficiencies that countries already have, and all the other problems that we've identified today, access to finance, the informality of the sector. So many African countries have issues that they are grappling with, war, and all that. So it's been difficult to move forward with the implementation of the AfCFTA, but the hope is that given time, like we said, it's in stages, right? So given time, the AfCFTA will be fully operationalized and Africans can be able to trade using the principles that it proposes.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. So the final question says, what progress has been made in addressing non-tariff barriers such as customs, regulations, procedures, and standards? That's from Marion, the last question on the chat box.
What progress has been made in addressing non-tariff barriers such as customs, regulations, procedures, and standards? Okay, so, like I said, there are a lot of documents, right, that need to be negotiated first by the countries and then operationalized. Recently, the rules of origin for the AfCFTA recently released. The rules of origin, like I said earlier, are basically the specifications for what makes an African product African. So despite the fact that the tools used to create such a product are from different places, it could still be an African product. So what are the rules that guide that? So different countries, like I said, have to one, negotiate this, then two, have to inculcate this into the practice of their countries. So domestication, like in Nigeria's perspective, is another issue on its own. So in terms of that, because the AfCFTA does not remove the sovereignty of African countries, right? It doesn't remove the sovereignty of African countries. It cannot create guidelines for, say, the Nigerian Customs Service, for instance, based on tariffs and all that, even though what it seeks to do is to get everybody's buy-in, right, to be able to change those tariff barriers. No, as for non-tariff barriers, in terms of like first one of the non-tariff barriers is attitudes, right? So basically, someone hears, okay, this good is from Nigeria, and they say, no, we don't want a Nigerian good. Give priority to a good from our country. Those are part of non-tariff barriers. And those are just some of the things I think that over time, with more education, more priority placed on the AfCFTA, more emphasis on trading within the AfCFTA's mandate, that many of those things will change when people are able to see the benefits that come from it. Because right now, a lot of it is just talk. We haven't really seen implementation yet. So in terms of the tariff barriers, a lot of it will need to come from the buying of the state parties themselves by rejigging their customs services to be able to follow through with the agreements that they sign, and also in terms of the attitudes, in terms of other non-tariff barriers, over time, I believe that those will be sorted.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
I think there's one I want to answer.
Fine. Okay.
Yeah, Alina's question on why IP enforcement is weak in many African countries. I think that will be the last one I'll answer. Why IP enforcement is weak? One, I should say, is the lack of a political will. One, and that is the basis for a lot of the things that go wrong in Africa. The lack of a political will to truly focus on this aspect of the law, I should say. And then secondly, it's not really that, secondly, it's the informality, right, of a lot of this creative industry practitioners, if I can put it like that. A lot of them do not even know that there are protection mechanisms in place. There is a knowledge gap in terms of the amount of people who know and understand that their creations are protectable or protected. And there has to be a lot of capacity building in that respect to bring people up to speed. We've mentioned the digital divide. So many people are not connected to the internet. You know, if we were to do a Zoom call, many Africans would not be able to join in because they don't even have the devices to be able to join into a Zoom call. And this feeds into the lack of enforcement, because the truth is, even though the laws are in place for a lot of IP, right, in terms of trademarks, patents, and what have you, the responsibility for enforcement of this intellectual property rights usually lies with the holder of the right. So if I have a trademark and I've registered my trademark and I do not take steps to enforce the protection of that trademark, then that intellectual property rights can be infringed upon without even my knowledge. So a lot of the time, because there is this knowledge gap that the practitioners have, they don't even know how to approach the protection of their intellectual property. And that is something that needs to change for IP enforcement to improve. It's a very varied conversation, lack of infrastructure as well. There are many things that we have been privileged to look into from a Nigerian perspective in terms of the regulatory bodies that are involved and how they work or do not work, if I should put it in that way, and all those lack. So there are so many reasons. If we want to go through that, then I will be here all day, but just a lack of knowledge and a lack of a will to protect that, I think it covers most. Yeah.
Yes, my
Hello.
question is, can you say that the challenges and barriers to actualize the AfCFTA objective is the change in regimes in specific countries? That is the constant elections and these people coming with their own team, removing their previous team. So like it brings a lot of confusion when it comes to actualizing its objectives. Could you say
Yeah.
the change of regimes?
Yes, that could be a reason, because a lot of African countries, using Nigeria, for instance, every government is completely different. There is usually not a will, like I said, political will to carry on what the last government did. Everybody wants to have their own achievements, in quotes, you know, and so that could be a barrier to actualizing the objectives of the AfCFTA. And we've also seen some of the unrest, or I don't know if we should term it unrest, but the governments in Burkina Faso and the Sahel countries moving to military rule and all that came with that, and the political backtalk and all that. And those are part of the challenges that the AfCFTA seeks to address. And those challenges will probably be there for a while more. But like we said, it's not a one-day thing. Rome was not built in a day. And I don't think that is what the AU expects. But over time, over the 35 or so year period that it has earmarked for the actualization of I mean, we're just about 3 years in, 2021. So I wouldn't say there's still time, because we know how a lot of these things lag, and before you know it, it takes time. But I think that the process is going well, and hopefully all these barriers will be removed and Africans will be able to trade amongst themselves easily and successfully.
Thank you, Charles. That was a masterclass indeed, in every sense of the word. I was sending my applause from him. I should have used my emojis. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Albert. So it's 6 weeks to the conclusion of this internship. I want to say thank you. I am incredibly proud of everyone. You are our first cohorts, and we have been learning in real time, tweaking a lot of things, and collaboratively working through the success of this program. We've learned so much from you, and I hope that you picked up a few things from us, from the classes we set up, from the master classes we set up, from the public figures you had to interact with by the virtue of this internship.